everyone, it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here with a new PB&J card class. And today's video is all about one of Penny Black's newest product lines. Penny Black now has released 3D embossing folders. And I had so much fun creating with these that I thought I would just do a little recording and share with you how I created using these cards and just how much I am really truly enjoying just embossing folders in general from Penny Black. So before we begin, I wanted to give you some tips for using 3D embossing folders. So these give you a really beautiful 3D impression. So my first tip is follow the recommended 3D embossing folder sandwich for your specific machine. And I find the best way to do this is just a Google search of 3D embossing folder sandwich for, and then insert the name of your machine. And that should get you exactly what you need for what you personally have. Next is to lightly move or sort of curl your paper to loosen up the fibers before embossing. Now this next tip is the top tip for using 3D embossing folders is to lightly spritz the paper with water before you put it in the folder. About 2 spritzes to the front and 2 spritzes to the back. And then finally, don't forget you can always experiment with different types of paper and different weights of paper. And all of these tips should help you minimize any type of cracking that may form. So for my Sizzix Big Kick, I'm using my standard platform, 4 sheets of cardstock as a shim. Then I will have my 3D embossing folder and my paper, which I will mist, and then I will mist a little bit off camera here so I didn't spray everywhere I was working. Then I will put that into my 3D embossing folder, and then I will have a cutting plate on top. So that is just when I Google searched for my specific machine, the sandwich that was recommended that could be used to do 3D embossing. And you will see here when I run that through, look at that beautiful design. This is Penny Black's 3D Berries Abound that you get. That 3D design is so stunning. And I'm just amazed every time at the detail that I see when I open up that embossing folder. It really is just such a fun technique. Now, as I was doing these, I did discover I certainly could mist these with more water. So I did have some cracking that appeared. So in the future, what I did was just mist more. So 2 spritzes on the front and 2 to the back to loosen up those fibers in the paper so that there's less cracking when it goes through the folder. Now, I did it once with the square size cardstock and captured the entire design. And here I'm doing the same embossing folder onto a standard size card panel, 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And it is just so beautiful, and I will be using both of these in today's video. You can see that one, I misted it a little bit better, and so it just had less cracking. So it's just experimenting a little bit with that with your machine and with the 3D embossing folders. So that first one was Berries Abound, and now I'm just going to show you the process here with the 3D Poinsettia. Now what's exciting about these as well is that Penny Black has also released with these a cutout die. So if you want to emboss and then cut it out, you can layer it on your cards, and stencils to make coloring these very easy to do. But look at that detail in such a beautiful design. Now I am doing these on a combination of papers. I did them on Canson 140-pound cold press watercolor paper, and then also a heavyweight Neenah solar white cardstock. Now you can also experiment with, as I'm doing here, with the standard size card panel, where you want to position that within the folder. So on this one I had part of the poinsettia extending off the edge of the paper. So there's plenty of sort of wiggle room inside of those folders to get the design exactly where you want it on your card. And again, here is a look at that when it comes out. It is just so fun, so satisfying to do that. And that is the one on the watercolor paper. Now I wanted to show you a couple of ways that or designs that I used with these after I had done the embossing. You certainly could just keep them as a background, layer some elements on top and just have that gorgeous white on white 3D look. I decided to do some painting on mine. So I pulled out my Sakura Koi Field Sketchbox watercolors. I also have a cup of water off to the side and a paper towel. And I really, typically I paint with Distress Ink re-inkers used as watercolors, but with this design, I wanted something just a little bit softer, something that sort of floated in a way on top of the paper as opposed to really going in and being super vibrant and sort of staining that design onto the paper. So that is why I chose these watercolors instead. What I'm doing right now is just getting that background. And so I am painting that around the design, but also overlapping a little bit over those leaves, which is totally fine. That way there isn't like white peeking out between the 3D design and the background. And when I paint over that sort of bluish turquoise color with the green of the leaves, those will mix and blend just fine together. So just a time saver too, or if you don't want to fiddle around with staying in the lines, pick a background color that will mix and blend easily with the color of your leaves. And then if you paint over the top of the leaf a little bit, it is no big deal. I'm going to go ahead and dry that before I move on to painting the leaf next. So I'm just using my heat gun to dry that. And now I will put the darker color on the leaf up towards where it would be sort of layered behind the other petals. And I'm just painting this as if I would if it was a stamp, and instead of being a raised edge, it was an outline. So I'm just painting right on top of this. It is really fun how some of the water and the ink will settle into those different details of the 3D embossing. Definitely not going for perfection on this. It is really that look of the 3D plus the watercolor all mixing together. It's not meant to look perfect. So you kind of have to let that go if you decide to paint these, but it's so, so pretty and very enjoyable to do that as well. So I'm mixing a couple of different colors of green here. Again, all of these are just from that Sakura Koi Field Sketchbox palette. And then I just follow that same process for all of the leaves. Next, I'm going to begin working on the petals. So again, I'm going to put that red, I'm going to work petal by petal and put that red where I would want it to be the darkest, sort of where it's going underneath the other petals or closer to the center of the flower. While it's still wet, I can pick up more paint from my palette and drop in that darker color wherever I want it to be darker. I'm using that ridge of the 3D embossing to guide me where, just like it was an outline or a stamped outline. And then if there's any areas of white or places where things are just not matching up perfectly, no worries. I'm going to put a little bit of ink on top of this with an ink blending tool and a foam pad once everything is dry, and that will really cover up any imperfections in your painting or white spots that might look a little bit starker right now. So you can see I'm just painting on that red onto the petals. While that petal is still wet, I can pick up a darker color and put it in and let it sort of blend out onto the wet area of that petal. And I'm just going to continue this going around the design. You can see it goes pretty quickly. And it's just fun to be doing something so different, and the effect again at the end is such a wow factor. But if you don't like painting or that's not your thing, don't worry. We have stencils for this, and I'm going to show you that in just a moment how those work as well. So lots of options. And I'm just going to continue that process all the way around on all of those petals. So that's what that looks when it is done. I'm going to add a little bit of color here to the center. And now here's where I'm grabbing that ink. So I have my Memento Toffee Crunch ink, an ink blending tool with a foam pad, and I'm just very lightly going over everything. So just in a circular motion, just lightly going over everything. I think that unifies the 3D design to the background, and again, hides any like white spots that you weren't happy with. This helps a lot, but because it's such a light color, it doesn't really discolor anything that you've already painted. Just be sure that everything's dry before you do that. Then I'm going to add a few splatters, just picking up that paint from my watercolor palette and hitting my paintbrush on the side of my finger. And then I'm also going to put a few splatters on with some white acrylic paint. This I'm just painting on so I have a little bit more control. I sort of wanted things to look like they were going diagonally across the card, so I just wanted a little bit more control with the white. Finally, I just added a little stamping up on that left-hand corner of the card, a die cut and a stamped sentiment, and the card is complete. And I just love how this turned out with the new 3D embossing folders and watercoloring. So here is another one with that Berries Abound design. Both of these are standard size cards, 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. And I painted this one just following that exact same technique. So really fun to do. Give you a couple close-ups here of these, and then we'll move on and I will show you how to use the new layering stencils with these 3D embossing folders. Now this Berries Abound too, you can position that any way you want on your card as well. So here I have my design. I have it embossed onto some smooth white cardstock, and now I'm pulling out the stencil layers, and I'm just going to put that stencil right over the embossed design. And then I'll just grab some painter's tape to hold that in place. You could also use, like if you have a magnetic system for doing that, you could use that to hold it in place. But you want to be sure that your stencil is not wiggling around when you're applying your color. Next, I will grab some distress ink with an ink blending tool and a foam pad. And I am just going to sort of slide that right across over the stencil and onto those leaves. So I'm starting with some distress ink in the color of Evergreen Bough. And I'm going to put that on all of the leaves. And you could certainly stop there, but I'm also going to grab another color and layer that up towards the top part of the leaves. So this is distress ink in the color of Forest Moss, and I'm just going to put that right up on top towards the top part of the leaves. And I just love those two colors combined together. And with the stencil, this is so easy. You can see, look at that, how easy and quickly a person can color in that 3D embossed design. Next, I'll get the branch layer, and I'm just positioning that over the 3D embossing. And then I will hold it in place with just a little bit of painter's tape. Now this is the most delicate of the stencil design, so you just want to use some care as you're applying that brown color over the top. And then finally I'll put on the third layer of the stencil, which is the berry. And I'll just hold that in place with a little bit of painter's tape. And I will get some red distress ink to add on top. Just putting that right over the stencil. And then once you've done all of your stenciling, you can either leave it as a panel design, or you can use the cutout die to cut everything out, which is what I'm going to do. It's also a great thing to do if you happen to do some 3D embossing and you didn't spritz it enough and you have a little bit of cracking that shows, pull out that matching die and the cracking will be cut off, so you won't see any of that. So I'm just putting that through my die cutting machine, and you can see I instantly have this beautiful design which I can layer with my other stamps and dies. That one I used our all-in-one oval die and just tucked in that beautiful embossing. Here I have our all-in-one octagon, and I layered in that poinsettia, which I did the inking on, and then the cutout die. So here is another look at those cards, just a close up at those cards. So lots of different options with these 3D embossing folders, and such beautiful classic designs for Christmas that you can use over and over again in so many different ways. Now before we go, I also wanted to show a couple other new Penny Black embossing folders. These are just your standard embossing folders. We have the texture and also this new one called Comfy. And I love these too. They're so simple. Here is a look at that Comfy embossing folder. Now this is not a 3D folder, so you would just run it through like you would any typical embossing folder. Here is what that design looks like. I love that you can trim it into a border. And I like to just put a little bit of Memento Toffee Crunch on top of this, or whatever ink color that matches your design. And it's just going to highlight those raised portions of the embossing. That is a super, super simple way to add some texture, to add a little interest to your cards. And here are several card ideas featuring these standard embossing folders from Penny Black that are also so beautiful. So here you can see I use that Comfy embossing folder in several ways as a border on my cards. Different colors, but again, just inking over the top of it to highlight those raised areas. Here is a look at that texture embossing folder, using it as a border along the side, and on the next card I will use it along the bottom, and just a white on white look, but it just is just enough to elevate the look of the entire card. I hope you've enjoyed this video and have gotten inspired to do some embossing yourself. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget you can connect with Penny Black on Facebook and Pinterest and Twitter, as well as Instagram, our website, and blog. And everything will be listed for you down in the YouTube description box, along with a supply list and links to the Penny Black products. Thanks for watching, and happy embossing!